Good morning, everyone, and welcome to your Business Morning. It's Monday, the 17th of June. I am Busi Damafai, and of course, we're live to you from Lagos, Nigeria's financial capital. So let's get the show started. President Buhari's new cabinet is now a headline conversation as businesses, investments, and markets and communities wait for the list of the new ministers. The president himself says at the Democracy's Day's presentation of his long speech that over the next 4 years, we are committed to assembling a strong team of Nigerians and allies to implement our transformative plans and proposals. So all eyes are now on Mr. President, who was elected into a second term of 4 years in February to make good on that promise by announcing his cabinet. Meantime, Nigeria's messy electricity transition market is still in focus, as some reports quote the TCN Chief Executive Officer, that's the Transmission Company of Nigeria, accusing power distribution firms of a total 231 billion naira debt as at the end of March 2019. On the economic front, it's a very busy day for Nigeria's economic calendar. We're expecting May's CPI and inflation, that's the Consumer Price Index inflation report today. We're also looking to the Statistics Office or the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics to release the data for LPG, automotive, kerosene, and diesel data also today. This will be part of the economic data that we're looking forward to today, setting off the week on the economic front. I put all of that at the back of your mind. We're now done with all the holidays, and now we're in full business. This is going to be full, no holiday trading week in the month of June. So let's go back to June the 12th, Nigeria's now new National Democracy Day, and President Buhari gave a very arousing 74-paragraph speech on that day. That was last week. That was the longest speech by Mr. President in recent times, and he spoke on Nigeria's past, present, and the future, which was anchored on the three main stories of economy, security, and anti-corruption. According to President Buhari, the thrust of his new administration is to consolidate on the achievements of the last 4 years, correct the lapses that his administration has done, and tackle the new challenges. Part of what Mr. President says, just to recap a few of them for you before we chew them over with our economists this morning, was the President says in 2002-2003 campaigns and elections, he says, I traveled by road to 34 out of the 36 states of the Federation. Then Mr. President went on to say that this year, I traveled by air to all 36 states of the Federation. Meaning, Mr. President did not go by road on the 2019 election campaign trail. But he did 34 states out of 36 during the 2002 and 2003 elections. Meantime, the President, Mr. President, says a huge responsibility rests on these and succeeding administrations to develop, harness, and fulfill our enormous potentials into a force to be reckoned with globally. On the vexed issue of insecurity, Mr. President says great difference between 2015 and today is that we are meeting these challenges with superior strategy, firepower, and resolve. On poverty, Mr. President says, among other things, that with leadership and a sense of purpose, Nigeria can lift 100 millions of Nigeria can lift 100 millions of Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years. So what about the future of the Nigerian economy? The president devoted about 3 pages of that speech to talk about his plans for the future, which includes integrating rural economies to the national economic grid via access to small-scale credit and inputs to rural farmers and rural micro-businesses, and open up many critical feeder roads and expand facilities for small-scale enterprises in towns and cities to encourage and support domestic production of basic goods and reduce reliance on imported goods. Mr. President Buhari says for the next 4 years, his administration will remain committed to improving the lives of the people by consolidating efforts to address climate change, new flashes of insecurity, and impacts on food scarcity and regional stability. He says there remains the urgent need to modernize our roads and bridges, electricity grid, ports, and the rail system. And speaking more to the private sector, Mr. President says he is more committed than before to work with the private sector to improve productivity and accelerate economic growth. and says, when economic inequality rises, insecurity rises. But when we actively reduce inequality through investments in social and hard infrastructure, insecurity reduces. And briefly on anti-corruption, Mr. President says for Nigeria to progress, our collective resolution to address corruption and foster broad-based prosperity is required to create a country that is not only for a few privileged, but for all Nigerians. So let's get a bit of this conversation started. Paul Alaje is a senior economist at SPM Professionals, is live to us from our Abuja studios. Good morning, Paul. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you on the program. Thank you so much. This was a 74-page paragraph speech. This is one of the longest Mr. President has delivered in recent times. He's known for delivering not so long speeches, as it were, but he chose the Democracy Day to speak extensively on the past, present, and the future. And on those three main pillars he's been speaking about since his first election: economy, insecurity, and anti-corruption. What's your general take on this 74-paragraph speech?
Yeah, it's clear the president understood some of the problems that the country is faced with. He mentioned that before now, he's been going via traveling by, via road transport system rather than going by air. But of course, he's our president, and his security is paramount to all of us. And he also have executive responsibility. He also needs to run his campaign. So it might be it could be, we may want to understand with him why he wants to go by air this time. But of course, to now see what the state of some of the roads are will also be another issue entirely. The key issue for me here is the issue of economy. And one of the major parameters for measuring how economy is doing beyond the gross domestic product is how many people became prosperous and how many people became poorer. And the president this time is saying, oh, we knew what the figures were, but 100 million Nigerians, hopefully we come out of poverty in 10 years. So he looked at the issue of security, mentioned what the strategy of his administration have been and what they hope to do. And he also mentioned perhaps what he has done better than several other administrations in office. I think to summarize some of the things he read out June 12 at Eagle Square is to say that he saw what was happening before. He has presented what he thought his team, of course, has done with the support and what the future should hold for Nigeria. That's the way I would like to summarize the president's speech.
Thank you, Paul. He spoke about Nigeria's past and present, and within that context, he spoke about what he calls the consolidating the first 4 years of his administration, but he also talked about correcting the lapses.
Yes, he mentioned correcting the lapses very, very importantly. First is what is happening to the economy. You agree with me that since the president came, Nigeria economy went into recession, year on year to negative growth, which took Nigeria to recession, lasted for almost a full calendar year. Nigeria is out of recession now. Growth went to above 2%. Right now it's 2.01%, approximately 2%. It's a key issue for Nigerians. Unemployment went gaga, highest ever since 2000, since the Civil War, I may say. If you look at the figure of unemployment and youth unemployment, inflation went crazy to above 18%. Thankfully now inflation is a bit above 11%. There are still issues. We have not resolved all the issues. There are still issues, but to correct this issue, the president has said he's going to get the right people in the right places to help him solve some of these problems. And I've watched with a keen interest the appointment of Mr. President, and I've seen the kind of men he wants to put in position this time. One, to get the right people. He knows how everybody has performed. We have National Bureau of Statistics giving us the scorecard of performance of economy, and also the Central Bank of Nigeria giving us the scorecard of the performance of the economy. And also we can also read reports of attacks left, right, and center from Castina to other places in the country, some level of insecurity, and also we we've also witnessed a number of reduction in the Boko Haram attack. What we might now be witnessing could be clash and violence between herders and farmers, and also banditry, kidnapping, which is a bit widespread than what we were expecting as of 2015. But we saw that these incessant attack, bomb blast, etc., by Boko Haram seems to have reduced meaningfully. However, it seems to be a sort of replacement by the new attacks. Mr. President, I believe, has seen all of those, and perhaps he has a strategy he wants to deploy in this new term, which I believe we also capture or reduce the rate of attacks on Nigerians, as we have seen it in the last couple of years.
Paul, thank you for your interventions. Let's bring into the conversation Bismarck Rewane, who is an economist, chief executive officer at financial derivatives company and Channel Television economic consultant. Mr. Rewane, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. We know it's Monday and it's an executive hour, so we appreciate your coming on the program. Thank you very much, live to us from our studios at the Nigerian Stock Exchange.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Rewane. This was a 74-paragraph speech by Mr. President on Democracy Day. This was the longest he's delivered in recent times. What's your take on the entire speech?
Well, I'm not going to waste my time on all of the... It's a long speech, and it's addressing all constituencies. It's a big country with diverse interests, and he addressed all of this. But the key thing for me is the economy. And the economy has two elements. There's what you can call transient and tactical changes, and what you call structural changes. The speech talked about blocking leakages, fighting the war against corruption, trying to create employment, trying to take people out of poverty. These are very good objectives and good intentions. But what has not been addressed is structural change. There are some structural changes that need to be made immediately. And those structural changes, to a large extent, means that you have to alter the pricing structure of the factors of production. If those structural changes do not take place, there will be no new investments in the sector. And those key investments in power, infrastructure, and other things will only come about if you allow people to charge the correct pricing for their products. So, one, we have to do structural change. Two, we should continue doing all the good things that the president talked about, which is the tactical things, managing interest rates, managing inflation. Those are tactical, but structural things have to be done. And besides, what the speech is short of is what are we going to do differently from what we've done in the past? Because if you do the same thing and expect different results, that's a problem. So we need to see and ask ourselves, what are those things we're going to do differently? The president was very clear that he wants to select a good team. His objective, he wants to move 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years, which is 10 million people a year. That's a noble intention. But how are you going to do it? How are you going to do it if aggregate investment in the economy is $66 billion, and which is only about 15% of GDP? You've got to bring that level to a much higher level. And to bring that to a much higher level, you need to get investors together to vote with their feet and vote with their wallets. Now, and that would drive growth. No growth, no wealth, no wealth, no transformation. And that's a battle cry. So if we're going to have an investment-led strategy, Mr. President and the economic management team have to be very clear in their minds that investors need to be incentivized. It's not about what we say, it's about what we do. And I think that is clear, and there's some of that in the speech, but it has to address the structural imbalances in the economy. Secondly, and most importantly, you cannot use monetary policy tools to solve fiscal problems. Growth is a fiscal objective.
Yes.
And that has to be...
Yes, as part of what, yes, part of what Mr. President spoke about early in that very lengthy address was, he says, a huge responsibility, therefore, rests on this and succeeding administrations to develop, harness, and fulfill our enormous potentials into a force to be reckoned with globally. Is this a signaling from Mr. President admitting that, yes, we can't do it all alone? The next administration and the next one and the next one have a lot of work, they have a lot of work to do.
Definitely. Government is a continuum. But you see, we've been talking about potential for 100 years and we are never there. Well, let us talk about the actual. What have we done? If we say we are going to lift 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years, let us ask ourselves, how many people did we lift out of poverty last year? How many people did we lift out of poverty 2 years ago? Sani Abacha in 1990 talked about Vision 2010, and we talked about Vision 2020. Now, where are we as an economy compared to what we set out to do and our dream of 2020? I can tell you categorically that we are so far behind what the objectives. We say we'll be growing at 8%, we'll do this, we'll do that, and the gap analysis shows some significant gaps. So first of all, I agree with the president that we should dream for 10 years, but I want us to fix what we have this year, fix what we have next year dramatically, because the foundation for the 10-year growth is based on the job we do this year and next year. So like I was saying when we had the question, fiscal objectives are growth, revenues, subsidies, budget, and all that's fiscal. Monetary policy is about pricing, price stability, and exchange rate mechanisms. You cannot have a 5-year growth plan or a 10-year growth plan which is being championed by monetary policy. Monetary policy will provide us stability. They are doing a good job. They will continue to do that. But fiscal objectives have to be clearly stated. And I think that had to come because the president is going to announce in a few days his fiscal team, and they will come hit the road running very, very, very quickly because we have no time to waste. We cannot waste time now because we have to be competitive and we have to draw from our comparative advantage. There's no question about it. We have challenges ahead. We are growing at 2% when we should be growing at 7–8%.
Mr. Awani, just a second. Let's put this question to Paul Alaje in Abuja Studios. Paul, Mr. President had always used this phrase whenever he delivers a speech on the state of the economy, that what his administration is doing is laying a foundation for the future. And that sometimes seems to be lost in the conversation sometimes when we comment and analyze what has been done. He says he's laying a foundation. So if you're building a house, the first set is the bricklayers that lay the foundation and all of that. So, and foundation is very critical. So do you think this administration is laying that right or those right foundations on which he is asking the incoming administrations to build upon? Paul.
Yeah, thank you so much once again. When you say you want to lay foundation for what? Let me assume the foundation Mr. President is talking about is foundation for creating 100 million jobs in 10 years, which means we'll be creating above 800,000 jobs in a month. Countries have done this before. A country called China lifted over 200 million people out of poverty in just 2 decades. Approximately what Mr. President's vision is based on his statement. The first thing when it comes to laying foundation is to provide power. If power is not provided sufficient enough for private sector to generate jobs, for private sector to generate revenue, then the foundation will not be meaningful in the first instance. This is it. You in Lagos, Mr. Ruwani at the NSC, and myself in your Abuja studio, we all put on suits. The suit we all put on, that might be sold in Nigeria, but the fabric are imported. The more we keep importing what we could produce locally, or what we consume the most. I understand economic theory talks about competitive cost advantage. I understand that place. And that perhaps Nigeria competitive cost advantage should be in production of crude oil or production of cocoa or something. That is not the argument. The argument is what we consume the most, what impact our foreign reserve the most, what creates jobs the most is what we should focus on in terms of production. Foundation is to change Nigeria economic production pattern from primary, which is crude oil, and also from agriculture, which is also primary, if you ask me again, to what countries such as Indonesia, India, and China, what the countries did for them to say we have lifted millions of people out of poverty. What did they do? Manufacturing. The foundation for manufacturing itself is power supply. We cannot be generating 5,000, 7,000 power supply and be distributing between 3,000 to 4,000 and talk about foundation.
Paul, I have a question for you and Mr. Rouhani when we come back after the break. The president talked about insecurity and inequality. This is part of the conversation moving forward. Everyone stand by. Mr. Rouhani at the Stock Exchange, Paul Alaji in Abuja, and our viewers. We're back in 2.